In this tutorial we are going to set up the database for our application. Now we've already got an empty database handy, as you can see here. And in a previous video I've already set up the database credentials, and we've got the database library set to be auto-loaded. So it's time to set up some tables. Now there's many ways to set up a database, and we'll be using Codeigniter migrations. Migrations is a sort of version control for databases. If you're not familiar with it, there's a section on it in the Codeigniter user guide. Now there's two steps to setting up migrations. First of all, you need to open up the migration file in your configuration folder and make sure you enable migrations, like so. Now there's some other configuration settings that you can edit here as well. First of all, you can set the migration version. Let's just set that to 1. Secondly, you can set the migrations path, but let's just leave that at default. Now the second step is that you need to create at least one migration file. And you do that within the migrations folder. Now I don't have such a folder set up here, so let's just add that. And we're ready to add our first migration file. Let's just go into this folder and add a new PHP file. The name will start with the version number of the migration, in this case 001, because it's our first migration. And then you'll want to think of a name that is descriptive. In this case we'll be adding a user table, so let's do create users. And that's it, we're good to go. Now let's borrow some code from the user guide, like so. And we'll just paste that in, clean it up just a little. Now let's start with the class name. You need to leave migration in, and then we'll have create underscore users. And that's the naming conventions. Migration classes always start with migrations underscore, and then the rest of the file name, but without the version number. They always should extend CI migration. Now as you can see, we've got an up function and we've got a down function. Now the up function is run when we do a migration. The down function is run when we do a rollback. So in our case we would create a users table in the up function and drop that users table in the down function. So let's go ahead and create that user table. We'll use the Forge library to set it up. First of all, we'll start with a ID, and it will be an integer with a constraint of 11. It will be unsigned and auto-incremented. Next we'll have an email address that will be a varchar of 100. Also we'll be storing a password, and since we're going to #512 that, we'll need a varchar with a constraint of 128 characters. Like so. And last but not least, let's add a name, 100 characters. And we'll name the table users, of course. Now if we're on a rollback, we need to drop that table users, so that's what we'll add here. And that should be all. Now all that we need is a controller to run this code. Let's just go into the admin folder and create a migrations controller. That'll be a CI controller called migration, and let's have that extend the admin controller. Now the reason I'm having it extend admin controller is that in a later stage we'll do a login check for every admin controller. So it's just to add that little bit of extra security there. Okay, now all we need to do is create a function called index, and inside of that index function we'll just load a library, and that'll be the migration library, of course. And then we'll just do this migration current. Now what this will do is it will look for the current migration version, which is 1, and then it will look for a file within the migration folders that starts with 1, and it will run that migration. We could also do some error checking there. Let's just copy this code from the user guide here. I know I'm just being lazy, but okay, well it works, and that's what matters. So what this does is it puts the migration inside of conditional, and if it returns false, then it'll show an error. And if it does not return false, then let's just echo migration worked. Okay, it's time to see if we can get this code to run. Let's go over to our CMS and just add admin migration, and we're getting an error there. And that's because I forgot to assign a primary key. So let's do that. This dbforge add key, and let's set that to true to make it a primary key. Now let's run it again, and the migration worked. And let's just go into PHP MyAdmin and see if that's worked. Well, we see we have a migrations and the user table, so it seems to be in order. In the migrations table, you see we have run version 1. And in the users table, you can see we have a user ID, email, password. This is an integer. And as you can see, we have a primary key set for the field ID. So that seems to be in order. Well, that went smoothly. So let's create another migration. Let's create a page table. So let's just close these out and open pages. A page will have an ID. It will have a title. And it will have a slug by which we can find it. And that will also be 100 characters. It will have an order, and that will be an integer with a constraint of 11. And then last but not least, it will have a body field. That body field will be a text field, and it will not have a constraint. And of course the name of the table will be pages. And if we're dropping a table, then it should be the table pages as well. Now if we go back to the browser, we will not be able to run this migration. It will say it worked, but as you can see in phpMyAdmin, nothing will have changed. No pages table will have been added. And that's because we're still telling Codeigniter to use version 1 of migration, and we are at version 2. So if we change this to 2, like so, and we'll go back to the browser and refresh that page. Oops, another error. Codeigniter is looking for a class called this, and we don't have that because we forgot to name that class. So let's just do that now and run the migration, and there you go. So we're back into phpMyAdmin, and we see that pages table has been created. We have a primary key of ID, and all the fields have been set correctly. Now, just to show how easy it is to roll back a migration, let's just go back to the migration file and change the version to 1. Now if we run the migration again, like so, and we go back to phpMyAdmin, you'll see that the pages table has been dropped. Now in these two examples, we have used the migration class to create entire tables, but you don't necessarily need to be restricted to that. You can also add fields, delete fields, drop fields, add in users, add in pages, stuff like that. It's really very powerful. In the next video, we'll be laying the last layer of foundation for our application, and that will be a My model from which we will extend all our future models. See you then.